in this video. Hello class, take a look at that keyboard in front of you. You wouldn't believe it, but that has taken us 300 years to get to that stage. And in this video I'm going to show you how that's occurred. Okay, the origins of the typewriter. The keyboard was developed from the typewriter, a mechanical device that pushed keys to make letters directly onto paper. We can see a picture there, the very first keyboard or typewriter. And what's happened, there's a piece of paper under it here. It's in a nice circle shape, and we've got these keys that are also placed in a nice circle, and they all point down onto one single point, and the person can push the keys and make a mark or a letter on the paper. And that's the very first typewriter. And the layout of the keys looked a little bit like this, so they didn't look like what we had today. And it's quite good. We've got A, B, C, D, and if you know your alphabet, that's the way it works. Okay, the typewriter was first patented in England in 1714, but it was not manufactured until 1870. That's over 150 years later. In those days, the mechanical keys kept jamming, so they changed the layout to make it slower to type. And that's how we got the QWERTY keyboard, which was invented in 1868. And since then it hasn't changed much, and we're going to find out a little bit of the reason why that is. Okay, so here we go. Here is the layout of a QWERTY keyboard, exactly like what we've got today. And it's called a QWERTY keyboard because if you look at the top row of letters, it starts with Q, W, E, R, T, Y. And they developed this keyboard because it allowed you to type very slowly, which is what they needed to do in those days. And it owes its origins to the inventor Christopher Latham Sholes. The patent rights were bought by Remington and Sons, who began selling in 1874. And there's their typewriter of the day. What's that, 150 years ago? That's what the most modern typewriter looked like. But it only used capital letters, so you couldn't type with lowercase, it just used capitals. But by 1901, another 30 years later, John Underwood was making a typewriter with a tab and a backspace key. So at that time, you could type on a piece of paper, but if you made a mistake, well, you couldn't go backwards. 1901, they had a backspace key. 1902, George Blickensderfer made the first electric typewriter, but unfortunately it didn't work well. It took another 20 odd years before the electric typewriter started to work well. By then it was 1925. And that must have worked okay for 40 years because in 1961 IBM began selling electric typewriters, but it stopped in the early 1990s. So for 30 years I believe that IBM was the main typewriter manufacturer. And this has all happened during my lifetime. He tried to fix a mistake. As typewriters improved, the keys were no longer getting jammed. In the 1930s, a person called August Dvorak analysed the keyboard, and he created a much better keyboard layout where he put the most used keys in the centre. And that would have made people be able to type much faster rather than going to look for a common letter that you're using, like the vowels U, I, and O, which are up on the top row. He moved them down into the centre, and the less common ones like the H, J, and K, which you don't use very often, he moved those up further away, and this would have created a much better and faster keyboard. But it was too late. By then everyone was familiar with the QWERTY layout. Okay, by then everybody knew how to type using the QWERTY keyboard, and people wouldn't change. So August Dvorak, here's a quote from him. "I'm tired. of trying to do something worthwhile for the human race. They simply don't want to change, and Dvorak gave up. Unfortunately, what that means for us today is that millions of human hours are wasted every year for people typing on slow and inefficient keyboard layouts. And today, there's even more millions of people doing that, and there's nothing we can do about it to change it. Okay, so here's some developments of the keyboard from 1962 to 1994, and I'm not going to go through these in detail. However, I will point out just a couple of points. IBM in 1964, they had one of the first early computers, and they needed to have some extra command keys, so they invented the Escape, the Alt, and the Control key. Plus there's some more here that we don't use very often, the pause, break, and the system request key. I don't even know what that does myself. In 1971, nearly 10 years later, again IBM, they introduced the Enter, the Insert, and the Delete key, the Home, the Page Up, and the End key, plus the arrow keys. Okay, so they've been around since 1971. Whoops. And once again, IBM, 1981, another 10 years later, introduces the personal computer. It has an 83 key keyboard. It has 10 function keys. So those are the F keys at the top of your keyboard. It has a number lock. Once again, those keys which they had already introduced. And then 3 years later, IBM introduced a 101 key keyboard, and that became the de facto standard that we all use today. Until 1994, Windows, Microsoft, introduces the Natural Keyboard, which has 3 extra keys that enable the use of the operating system without a mouse. Okay, so that was, well, it was a sort of standard, but Windows was still going to improve the keyboard with just a few extra keys. And if you look down, you can see your Windows key, and you can see the right-click key down the bottom near the spacebar, and I guess that the other key that they introduced was the function key. Okay, I'm not too certain about that. Anyway, let's move on. So, let's have a look at typing techniques. We have got touch typing, okay? Fingers start on the home row. The home row, that's the middle row of your characters, and your fingers, your first fingers start on the F key and the J key. You keep your eyes up. Theoretically, you're not supposed to look at the keyboard, and you just watch the screen. Your brain knows where all the keys are, and this is the fastest method of typing. Okay, it's the method that in the old days, when I was young, everybody at school learnt how to do typing, and they learnt the touch typing method on old electric or mechanical typewriters. The next method, the hunt and peck. Okay, this is using 2 fingers. This is using your first finger on each key. You're watching the keyboard, you're searching for each key every time, and that becomes your slowest typing method. Then we've got a hybrid sort of method, which is a little bit of a combination of touch typing and hunt and peck. And this is where that you use several keys are used. The user sort of memorizes the location of each key, but the problem is what happens is that the head moves up and down from the screen to the keyboard as you're looking at the screen and then searching for the next key, and you sort of get to know the keyboard. And it's probably the most common method that people use today, because unfortunately today we're not taught touch typing, which if you do bother to learn it is definitely your best method to learn. However, when you've got 101 keys, a lot of people use, for some of the odd keys, the unusual keys, you still use the hybrid method where you're looking up and down for the keys, for your next key. And then there's a new method of typing, and that's called thumbing. Okay, this is the method where a lot of young people use it on phones, and they're sort of holding their phones with the palms of their hand, and they're using their thumbs on their phones. Right, we're going to have a look at some keyboard designs here. We've got flexible keyboards, we've got a folding keyboard here. Here's a person with a touchscreen keyboard with a phone using the thumbing method that we talked about in the previous slide. We've got this ergonomic keyboard here, where what's happened is that they have split the keys down the center. Your left hand comes in from a slight angle, which is more natural angle, to work those keys on the left hand side, and your right hand comes in from a slight angle from the right and works the keys on the right hand side. That was popular probably about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's not so popular these days, but it's certainly it is a comfortable way of learning to use the keyboard. You need to practice it a little bit more. We've got laptop type keyboards here and over here. The big difference between these is that they don't have, I'll just use this one as an example, they don't have the number keys on the left hand side, as well as the page up and arrow keys here. They're all incorporated. There's your arrow keys down here on the laptop type keyboard. The page up and page down and home, I believe they're up the top there. So what they're trying to do with this keyboard here is keep it all compact as possible. Your numbers along the top. You've still got the QWERTY keyboard, so your alpha characters are all still positioned the same. They're usually the same size. You've got two enter keys here and here. No, you don't. Oh, sorry, you've only got the one enter key. But most of these are the same on this keyboard as well as they are on this one. It's just a more compact keyboard. Plus, in this one here, we've got a touchpad down the bottom. Here we've got an on-screen keyboard. Okay, this one is provided by Microsoft. You can use that on screen and click each key with your mouse. If your attached keyboard is not working. So there we go, there's some keyboard designs, and I'm sure that there's probably a few more. One thing I will mention is that, remember August Dvorak, he changed the keys. That is still a possibility, especially with touchscreen keyboards. You can set your keyboard to be Dvorak, in which case your alphanumeric keys are going to all change positions. Or you can, if you search around, you can buy mechanical Dvorak keyboards, but they're not really that common these days. Well, they're not easy to find, but you can find it. The only problem is that you do need to learn how to use it, and the trouble is with learning how to use it is that when you go and change into another computer or another keyboard, you have to go back to the QWERTY keyboard. And this is why August Dvorak, he gave up. He was trying to do a good thing, but people have got used to the QWERTY keyboards and it becomes very difficult to change. Right, so you guys have got a task. You're going to create a poster in Publisher. It's going to show a timeline of the development of the keyboard. Okay, the timeline starts in the year 1700 and goes to today, so that's 300 years. It's going to include pictures. You're going to present it well. You can use A3 or A4 paper, and you can cover several pages. You need to hand in your work. So when you're using Publisher, you're actually choosing a piece of paper, okay? But we're not going to print this. We're going to hand it in electronically, okay? I'm going to show you a little bit like what it's going to look like. So here we go. Here's an example timeline. This is a timeline, it looks like, of flight, okay, going from 1906 through to 2020. We've got an astronaut there, and varying events happening along the way. Now, your timeline is going to be 300 years. So you're going to start down here, okay? Whoops. You're going to start down here at the year 1700, and today is going to be, up here is going to be today. Now, remember, it was 150 years from the patent till the first typewriter. I think it was Remington started manufacturing the first typewriter. So from pretty much from here to here, nothing is going to be showing, okay? And even for 50 years after that, there really wasn't a lot happening. IBM, or no, Remington were making their typewriter, and then for a lot of this, it was IBM. So most of the actions, things that happened in the keyboard, happened in this last period here. And this is where you're going to be putting a lot of your information. So what I'm suggesting to do is do this over 3 pages. So this will be your page 1, okay? This will be your page 2. You'll have to keep this possibly on page 2. Your line will go about here. There's page 1. There's page 2. Most of your the things, the events that occurred in the keyboard will happen on page 3. Okay, so we might do a video and show you how to do that, get you set up and get you started on that. But in the meantime, I've explained all I need to do about keyboards. I hope you guys learned a bit, and you can now go and start your task, and we'll see you guys in the next video.